Sergei was packing the way people pack when they are completely sure they are right. Not slamming doors, not rushing, with the cold calm of someone who had already made his decision. He folded his shirts neatly into a travel bag, arranging them as if he were putting his whole life in order. On the dresser lay a thin folder, the documents confirming the sale of his share of the apartment. Half of the home he and Lena had lived in for 8 years now belonged to someone else. Everything had been arranged yesterday, quickly and quietly, through a familiar real estate agent. Lena knew nothing, and that made Sergei feel especially powerful. He felt smarter, stronger, luckier. A new life was starting for him, with young, bright Katya, who always smiled at him with admiration and told him he deserved more. Lena, in his eyes, had long turned into a dull background. Work, routine, tiredness, endless conversations about a future that no longer inspired him. He was not going to explain anything. He was simply leaving. Before closing the door behind him, Sergei paused and looked around the room where they had eaten dinner together just the night before. Everything looked calm and ordinary, and that irritated him. He wanted drama, cheers, emotion, proof of his importance. He decided he would come back later, just to see her reaction. To enjoy the moment when she learned the truth. A few hours later he was standing at the door of their apartment, already confident about the scene waiting for him. He imagined Lena's confused face, her trembling voice, her not understanding what had happened. He rang the bell. Silence. He opened the door with his key. The first thing he felt was something strange, emptiness. Not inside himself, but around him. The hallway looked unfamiliar. The shoe cabinet was gone. The mirror was gone. Only his forgotten jacket hung on the hook. He walked further and stopped. The apartment was almost empty. No sofa, no television, no wardrobe. The armchairs, the table, even the rug he had once chosen himself, all gone. The windows were bare, the light falling onto naked walls. It looked as if no one had lived there for a long time. Only a small table stood by the window. Lena sat there with a cup of tea. Calm, collected, steady. "You're late," she said quietly. Sergei walked closer, unable to understand what was happening. "Where is everything?" he finally asked. "Mine," Lena replied shortly. "I took it." He smirked, trying to take back control. Putting on a show, she looked straight at him. There was no pain, no anger in her eyes, only clarity. "I know what you did, Sergei. About the sale, about Katya, about everything." Something inside him tightened. "And," he said. Lena took a folder from the wall and handed it to him. Sergei accepted it mechanically. The pages trembled in his hands as he read. With each line, his confidence dissolved. The contract of sale, his share, bought out completely. The buyer, a private individual. Signature, date, everything perfectly legal, and the money he had received yesterday had already been transferred back. "How?" he whispered. "You thought I didn't know about your plans," Lena said calmly. "I understood everything a month ago. I was just waiting." He sank into a chair. "The new owner of the apartment is me," she continued. "Through a trusted person. You signed all the papers yourself." Sergei raised his eyes. His usual smile was gone. For the first time in years he did not feel like the master of the situation, but like a man whose ground had been pulled away. "You wanted to leave me without a home," Lena said. "And I simply let you leave, with nothing." At that moment the door opened and a man with a folder stepped inside, tall, confident, businesslike. "Everything is ready," he told Lena. "We begin tomorrow." She nodded. Sergei sat in silence, realizing that at this very moment he had lost everything: his family, his money, his control, his sense of superiority. He stood, not knowing what to say. Lena looked at him calmly, as at a closed page. "Goodbye, Sergei." He left, and the door closed softly behind him. And in the empty, bright apartment, Lena felt not pain, but freedom, for the first time in many years. Sergei stepped out into the stairwell and stood there for a long moment, not moving. The door had closed behind him so quietly that the sound seemed unreal, like the final note of something that had been playing in his head for years and had now simply stopped. The silence was thick. He suddenly became aware of the echo of his own breathing, the distant hum of the elevator, the faint smell of paint from some neighbor's renovation. Everything continued exactly as before, and yet nothing in his life was the same. He pressed the button for the elevator, then stopped himself and walked down the stairs instead. Each step felt heavier than the one before. He kept replaying the scene. The empty apartment, Lena's steady voice, the papers in his hands, the quiet confidence of the man who had entered at the end. All the moments he had planned in his head, the mocking smile, the cruel satisfaction, had collapsed into something he had never prepared for, complete powerlessness. Outside, the evening air felt cold against his face. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked at his phone. A message from Katya waited at the top of the screen. "Did you talk to her yet? When are you coming?" He typed, erased, typed again. Soon, he started walking, not knowing exactly where he was going. The city around him was alive. Couples laughing, cars honking, someone playing music from an open window. He felt like he was moving through a world that no longer belonged to him. When he finally reached Katya's apartment, she opened the door with her usual bright smile. "Well," she asked. Did she cry? Sergei did not answer. He went inside, dropped his bag near the wall, and sat on the edge of the couch. "What happened?" Katya's voice lost some of its excitement. "She knew," he said. Katya frowned. "About us. About everything." He told her the story in fragments. The empty apartment, the documents, the sale, the fact that Lena now owned the entire place. Katya listened, her face slowly changing from curiosity to disbelief. "So, you don't have the apartment?" she asked. "No. And the money from the sale?" "Gone." She crossed her arms. "So what do you have?" Sergei looked around the small, rented apartment. Cheap furniture, thin walls, no sense of permanence. "I don't know." The silence between them grew uncomfortable. Katya finally spoke. "Sergei, you said you were set. You said everything was under control." He said nothing. That night he lay awake on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The future he had imagined, easy, victorious, exciting, had evaporated. What remained was something fragile and uncertain. Meanwhile, Lena stood alone in the empty apartment, listening to the city outside her window. The walls were bare, but the space felt clean, like a page that had finally been turned. She moved slowly from room to room, touching the walls, the windowsills, the doorframes, all the places that had once carried so much of her old life. She remembered the night she had discovered the truth. The unfamiliar perfume on his jacket. The message on his phone he had forgotten to delete. The sudden changes in his behavior. The distance, the irritation, the secretive calls. At first she had wanted to confront him immediately. Instead, she had waited. She had gone to a lawyer. Then to a financial advisor. She had learned more in a month than she had in the 8 years of their marriage. She had protected herself quietly, carefully, without drama. By the time Sergei believed he was making his grand escape, everything had already been decided. She poured herself another cup of tea and sat by the window. For the first time in years, her mind was not racing with questions. It was calm. The next morning the apartment filled with movement. Workers arrived to measure the rooms, inspect the pipes, discuss renovation plans. The man from the day before, Alexei, went over contracts with her at the kitchen counter. "You handled this well," he said, impressed. "Most people panic." Lena smiled faintly. "I was tired of panicking." By the end of the week the apartment had a new energy. Fresh paint on the walls. Light fixtures replaced. The beginnings of something new. Sergei, on the other hand, felt himself shrinking. He and Katya began to argue. She wanted him to figure something out. He wanted time. She reminded him that he had promised her a better life. He reminded her that things did not always go according to plan. One evening she said quietly, "I didn't sign up for this." He realized, then, that the admiration she had shown him was never really about him. It had been about the life he represented. A month later he moved out of her apartment too. He rented a small room on the edge of the city. The days were long and empty. The nights even longer. Sometimes he walked past the building where his old apartment was, standing on the opposite side of the street, watching the lights in the windows. He imagined Lena inside, working, reading, building her new world without him. One evening he finally sent her a message. "How are you?" She replied hours later. "Fine." That was all. Sergei sat on his bed, staring at the phone. For the first time in his life, there was no one to blame but himself. Lena's life continued to grow. The apartment renovation finished. She and Alexei opened their small design studio, just as planned. New people, new conversations, new dreams filled her days. Sometimes, late at night, she thought of Sergei, not with anger, not with sadness, but with a distant sense of closure. She had not won, she had simply survived, and in doing so, she had found herself.